I'm John. How are you doing?
Hello, my name's Ngaio.
Um, I just had a couple questions for you about your work and about your past, if that's cool.
Sure. About my past, it's deep, dark everywhere.
I only say that because the first question I have for you is when was the first time you smoked weed and how was that?
Oh God, probably sometime in summer camp in 1970 something when I was like 10 or 12. I think I hung out with the counselors and they let me smoke a joint with them one time, and that
Really?
was actually pretty fun. Yeah, but then I didn't do it again until like eighth grade. And then my parents busted me and they're like, hey, lay off that shit till college. And I was like,
Yeah.
you know what? That's a good idea. So I laid off till college and then I became a pretty big stoner, but I mean, not unprofessionally or nothing.
Right, of
And,
course.
and it also spurred my activism,
Right.
right? Because I like weed so much, it didn't make sense for people to go to jail for it. And I started learning more about the thing and all the things to do. I was like, this should not be illegal. So it all went from there.
So just kind of working off of that. So how did you get involved with like the cannabis activism specifically? Like when did that start?
Mostly by showing up. That's that's how it started. You just go to a protest or you go to an event and then you meet other people and they're like, hey, we're doing another protest here. We're having another event there. And then
Right.
that one and they're like, hey man, good to see you again. Come out to this other one. I'm like, I'm on my way. I'll be there. There's no it's not like a secret. You don't have to be in
All
a
right.
secret club. Those come later.
So at
But
these, sorry,
yeah, no, go ahead.
at these protests, what was the, I don't want to say, what was like the vibe at these protests? Like, what kind of people did you meet? And like, what kind of messages did you guys want to put out there
You
and make known?
you meet people from everywhere, from all over, from all walks of life, right? That's one of the beautiful things about weed. Just about everybody, all different cultures, all different races, all different people, different hobbies, different things. People like weed, right? So
Amen.
you meet a bunch of people that maybe you never would have met or hung out with, and but you have weed in common, so you can start from there, and then go from there. Um, definitely in the beginning, it was mostly hippies and radicals,
Right.
right? But as we started gaining more steam and getting better at it, then the suits want to show up and for there was a hot minute when we were down in LA when we started dressing up. I started asking people to dress up a little bit more to attend the protest because that way, if you get on TV, people don't just see a bunch of tie dye and shit. You see people in a suit and a tie and looking very nice. But that's kind of respectability politics. I'm not really like that anymore. I mean, people who hate weed are gonna hate weed no matter what you're wearing. But
True.
but for people who may be on the fence, they look around and they go, well, maybe it's not just dirty, filthy hippies. But I
Yeah.
don't. I'm still. I still feel like one of the challenges that we're having right now is we still need to keep space for radicals and for people to push the argument way further. I mean, that's the when you're arguing with conservatives and right wingers, those guys start at an extreme position. So if you're showing up to compromise, you're already at a moderate position. When you finish the compromise, you're going to be way further to the right of where you want to be. So if they're going to start way off on the right, then you got to start way off on the left, right? So that by the time you get to the compromise, it's something that everybody may not be happy with, but can live with better than some of these other things.
Yeah, for
And I
sure.
think kicking the hippies out the room or keeping the radicals out of the discussion is not the best way to go about it. I think you need those guys, so you play good cop, bad cop, which is
Right.
not a great, good hippie, bad hippie. I don't know, radical hippie, peace loving hippie. I don't know, something like that.
So, I guess just to like, if you did have a conversation with, let's say, a Republican who was, who was super conservative and felt that cannabis shouldn't be legal in the States, in any state at all, where do you think you would approach that argument from? Like where, from a health
Well,
perspective, from a recreational perspective, like where?
I think a lot of times when I'm talking to Republicans, I deal with it as a freedom issue, right? Because that's always their big thing, right? You should be able to do what you want, right? America's got rights. And so if like my friend Brian Mallow says, like, who's the victim in the crime? Well, you're victimizing yourself. All right, well, I choose not to press charges. I'm gonna let myself go with a warning, right? That's a Brian Mallow, Malow, the science comedian. That's his joke. So that's where I generally start with those guys. I'm like, listen, it's common sense. Cannabis is safer than just about any other recreational drug in the world. It's safer than booze. It's safer than pills. It's safer than opiates. People like to get high. People like to alter their consciousness every once in a while. There's no reason people should go to jail for that, right? But the challenge, of course, is if common sense were the rule of the land, cannabis would never have been made illegal, right? And I don't know how many city council meetings I've been to, how many politicians I've talked to, where you set out your reasonable, cogent arguments, and they're like, "Oh yes, this is all makes very much sense. It's all a great idea," and then they vote against you anyway, right? So if common sense and science were what we used as guidelines, we would all be wearing masks, and we wouldn't be having this giant fucking pandemic in this country. So that is one of the challenges. You get up against ingrained, people have been taught for so very long that weed's going to make you a crackhead or make you sleep with black jazz musicians or whatever. That was the myth in the 30s. So you have to get through all that. You got to get through 100 years of propaganda and bad science to get to the truth and to the kernel of the matter. So, but I usually frame it as a freedom and a common sense issue, and that's generally where we get the most traction, where I get the most traction. Other people come at it from completely different ways.
So you talking about right? You talking about how, like, this is ingrained. This is an old like bias. So yeah. Just even in, I mean, I know you haven't been doing this for 100 years, but
feels like it.
Just for your your personal experience. How has public advocacy and like public reception changed just since you started being an activist and being involved?
Most definitely. In my comedy career, early enough, they were just like, "Oh, well, he's just a stoner. We don't really need people talking about weed." And now they're like, "Oh, we need a couple weed comics." And then, they're like, "Well, we need some young weed comics," but that's cool. But so it's way more accepted. It's become way more mainstream. If you smoke weed now, it's just, it's like, oh, that guy just likes to smoke weed. It's not like, oh, he's a bad person or he's a criminal. Although I miss kind of being an outlaw a little bit. I don't know what else I'm going to do to feel dangerous.
That's the thing. So I'm 21. So for me, I sort of grew up in this phase of change where, like, it wasn't really criminalized. I mean, it was kind of criminalized for sure. It's still there, but at least for my generation, it was.
Or Idaho?
Idaho, yeah, from Boise. So I mean, I've had my thing with cops and whatever, but like even in high school and in college, like, it wasn't, people didn't try and demonize you when you did
right. That was just something you did. Like, some people like to drink, some people some people like to have sex. To your point, I had met somebody. I was hanging out at this one weed club one time, and I met somebody who grew up in California, and she couldn't remember when there weren't dispensaries. Right? Because, I mean, the first dispensary probably opened in, Prop 215 passed in 1996, but there were already a bunch of underground dispensaries in 94, 95. So if you're 21, 22, oh yeah, in California and San Francisco, for sure, right? Because the medical cannabis movement grew out from the AIDS crisis, right? When people like Brownie Mary and Dennis Perone and other people in San Francisco realized that medical cannabis helped alleviate a lot of the symptoms from AIDS. It helped people to eat. It helped people to live better lives, to have a better quality of life. And then people started looking more and more into medicinal uses of cannabis, because cannabis has thousands of years of history. Was it 5,000 BC? It's something ridiculous. Yeah. People have been using cannabis medicinally. I just saw an old medieval picture, and it had like cucumbers and cannabis, and they were talking about the analgesic properties and how we can help you with this and that. And this is in 1347 or whatnot. So it's good to get back to that. And as cannabis is more mainstream, and as the scientists, and not just the hippie scientists, but the scientists are getting into it, we learn more and more where it's not just THC, right? It's not just CBD, but these different terpenes have different effects, and all these other things. And on one hand, I think that's really awesome, right? Because people do like to have a specific thing. If you got pain, maybe you need a certain terpene or whatnot. Of course, we know how science is going to want to try to synthesize everything. And so it's no longer like weed extracted. We just made this shit in a lab, but it acts just like weed, which it doesn't. But we also are learning more and more about the entourage effect, right? Where it's not just THC or not just CBD or not just myrcene or not just beta carotene that gives you the effect you want, but it's a combination of those in a certain strain, right? That's why some people like Trainwreck more than they like Jack Herer, although they're very similar. Because it's the entourage, it's the combination of these chemicals and medicines that you get from the cannabis plant, from the whole plant, that has more of an effect than just one or two different things, right? Because too much THC will make you paranoid as fuck all the time.
Yes,
We've all happened.
Golly.
Golly, you are from Boise, Idaho. Golly, dang. Ooh, bro, that's
so you like that? You can use it. So the problems that you saw, let's say like back in the 90s, back in the 80s, getting involved in this movement, are they still the same problems that you see right now? Like politically or even, publicly?
I mean, I'm fortunate enough to live on the West Coast where weed is pretty much legal. I mean, it is legal. It's illegal. So we don't really get sweated that much out here. And we see changes in towns like Austin and Nashville and all these other places where the DA is finally going, listen, we're not throwing people in jail for weed. We're just done with it. It takes up too much time, too much space in the system. It fucks up people's careers. If you got, a doobie or two or a gram or so or an eighth or an ounce, it's not a problem. You just like weed. That's on you, right? You're still showing up for work. You're still being a professional, or you're being a high functioning stoner. They should probably have like double. So this is great. Also, when it comes to, LA is still chock full of unregulated cannabis clubs because Los Angeles really can't get it together in a lot of different ways. But, back in the day when you had an unlicensed cannabis club, because weed was kind of illegal and Prop 215 was murky, people were definitely pushing the envelope. They used to come and raid you. They'd send the DEA or they'd send all the sheriffs and they'd come and raid your whole shop and throw people in jail and take all your money and take all your weed. Now they send you a letter. You get a letter from the city department like, hey, we're going to fine you, right? Be cool. Just stop doing this shit. And so it's a completely different, I'm knocking on wood right now. There's way less danger in a lot of areas, which is the most important thing. I think we get away from a lot of times. We get away from in this pursuit of cannabis industry and cannabis millionaires and people doing this and doing that. We get away from the social justice aspect. Medical cannabis, the cannabis legalization movement, first and foremost, social justice. Keeping people out of jail. No one should go to jail for weed. It's wasteful. It's not productive. It doesn't fix any problems you may have. All drug abuse is a social health. It's a public health issue. It's not a criminal issue. Right? People use drugs. Some people abuse drugs. Those people need help. They don't need jail. Jail is not giving anybody any coping tools to deal with why they feel the need to be addicted to drugs. So, especially recently with a lot of these political events, we see a push to defund the police, to move these resources away from criminalization, right, into social help and social things. And I think that's a big important side of this movement. Has helped a lot of that.
That social justice movement. So you have I read some of your stuff, and I've seen a little bit of your stand up. You're
All
great, by
right.
the way. Thank
Oh,
you
thank you.
for
Thank you
that.
so very much. We have a comedy show coming up. I don't know when this is going to be printed, but I do a monthly show the 20th of every month at the Nowhere Comedy Club.
It'll be
Right.
out
So
in a couple days, I think. Yeah, we could put that out there for sure.
we post a link. It's the 7/24/20 Comedy Extravaganza with me, Greg Proops, Chris Titus, Jessica Wellington, Becky Lynn, and Corey Showtime Robinson. It's a damn good show.
Damn.
Damn.
So, like, from what I've read, you've got a powerful, like a far-reaching voice,
Oh,
and
sure.
a lot of what you talk about, a lot of what you write about, is in the service of that social justice you were talking about. So, is there like a message or a mantra that you keep in mind every time you start writing, or every time you get on stage, or every time you just
Start
put pen to
writing.
paper?
It took me a long time to recognize, because I really don't often, I mean, when it comes to cannabis, yes, I'm a cannabis writer, right? And other things, I write about that. But when it comes to my stand-up comedy, I've never really thought of it as writing, because to me, it's such an oral tradition, right? So I always think of it as just coming up with jokes to tell on stage. So I rarely, and this is for good or for ill, I rarely actually write my jokes down. So when you say, do you sit down to write a joke?
Is that true?
I really get in a car and drive around to think of jokes. Because, yeah, to me, it's true. Because to me, spoken is different than written, right? Written humor has a different rhythm or different rules than spoken humor, right? Or performance humor, because you're standing there, they can see your face, they can see your eyebrow or your smirk or your timing, how you wait or how you emphasize a certain word. And that's, you do it a different way when writing it down than you do when speaking, right? So, I mean, every once in a while, somebody will be like, you got to write out your act. And so I will do it, but I'll do it in the way that I speak, as opposed to sitting down to write out some jokes. I don't know. It's just it's a different process for everybody.
Right. No, of course. So, I mean, you got a talent for stand-up, and it seems like you can really work the crowd.
Thanks.
So, yeah.
It's been a long ass time.
So, where did that start? Like, how did you start that passion for stand-up?
My parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles all had all kind of crazy comedy records, right?
Oh, no way.
Richard Pryor, Red Fox, Bob Newhart, Jonathan Winters, Shelley Berman. They had all these comedy records that I just listened to over and over and over again. And then as I got older, I would buy like Steve Martin and Eddie Murphy and things like that. And that's like 8th grade, high school and whatnot. And then, I was fortunate enough to live in San Francisco. So I was working at Pier 39. I didn't really want to sell T-shirts anymore, and I saw the street performers making bank. So I learned to juggle, became a juggler. And then from there, people were always like, you're really funny. Because I would do bits, because I could remember everybody's bit. So if it came up, I'd be like, oh, that reminds me of this bit. Or they'd be like, hey, do that Steve Martin bit. So I would do the bit or whatnot. And then so as I got into my early 20s, my late teens, I just started hitting up open mics, and I was like, oh yeah, man, I could probably do this. And I had a lot of good mentors like Diane Amos and Robert Butterfly Man Nelson, who put me on the right track, who were like, this is how you set it up. This is how you set up your press kit. This is how you make your phone calls. These are all the things you got to do. Here's some cats you can talk to. And I was relentless. It's like a job, right? It's show business, right? They're co-headliners. It's not just show, right? There's the other side to it. So I took that really seriously for the longest time, just, to get established and get your name out there and hustle.
So, my Lord. So how do you approach that? Because when you perform, you do have a voice, and you can tell that you want to speak about issues, about important things to you. So how?
Yeah, my albums are called Weed and Sex and Weedier and Sexier. So I'm really, it's not like, I'm not overtly Mr. Social Justice Warrior or Mr. Leftist Politics or whatnot. That's just, if you listen to my act, you can hear my feelings on the matter, but I'm not super overt about it. I'm a big fan of the edutainment and whatnot, as espoused by KRS-One and School of Rock. So I don't know. I don't really sit down and be like, I'm going to write a joke about cannabis justice or whatever. I'm like, well, this is funny, or this shit happened and this is funny, or I had a funny thought about something.
Okay. Okay.
Damn, that's how it's going to come out. I suppose I should try to be more specific about it. I'd probably be on somebody's writing staff. They're like, hey, we need you to write something funny about penguins and criminality. And I'd be like, all right.
I'm down.
Down.
So
and do it on time and be funny for money.
Okay, so for the writing, like if you were on a writing staff, or I know you write for that column right now.
I mean, I write for a bunch of different things. I'm starting a new column with Leafly, and I'm starting a new column with Weed Week pretty soon.
Wow, congratulations.
Thank you. I hate writing. That's Dorothy Parker says, I hate writing. I love having written.
That's an interesting way to put that.
Yeah.
It's true though. So how do those two roles, like as a columnist and then as a stand-up artist, as a comedian, even in general, how do they like interact or interfere with each other? Like when you're trying to speak?
Well, I think, when I'm writing a cannabis advice column or an opinion column or something like that, my natural humor just shines through anyway. But the goal is not to be funny the whole time, but to be informative and entertaining, right? So definitely some humor in there. But when I'm on stage, it's like fucking joke. Wait a minute, joke, small joke, big joke, right? Smaller. Big jokes. So it's a whole different. It's a different mindset, but it's all weed and sex. So at least that's what I tell them. That's what I tell them. And then you listen to it and you realize there's quantum physics and
a lot more going on.
Philosophy and poetry and all kind of things. Yeah.
Right. So just to wrap it up, because I don't want to keep you from anything. Are there any? This is going to be kind of dark. Are there any like arguments that you're hearing or any problems that you're seeing? Just within our social environment right now that alarm you pertaining to cannabis specifically?
Lately, I've been filled with rage and hope because like shit is fucked up. So rage is definitely try to let my anger motivate me, but not guide me. And the hope is because you see so many people, you see almost a critical mass of people saying, all right, it's enough. It's enough with the systemic racism. It's enough with this bullshit. It's enough with not paying attention to it. And so that fills me with hope because I feel like we can go further faster because we have more people on our side now who really looked around and went like, we really have to fix this shit, right? I was born in 1968, which is right after the Civil Rights Act was passed. And we've come a long way. Like shit is still fucked up, but we have definitely come a long way since then, right? Like my 6th grade teacher told us that little nigger kids didn't belong in the gifted program, right? And he kept his job, right? But now if somebody tried to say that to a student, they would be fired.
How old are you?
I'm 52. I was like...
No, in the class.
That would have been 8th grade, so 1980, I was 12, 13.
Lordy.
Yeah, right. So you can't even imagine, like, right? And, my parents or grandparents would be like, oh, they fucking told us that all the time, right? So,
shit.
Yeah. So I was also really good in the gifted program, by the way. But so I didn't believe it. And that's the thing. You got to know yourself. But so we've definitely come far, but not as far as we need to go, of course, and maybe not as quickly as we could have, right? Especially in other parts. And don't get it twisted. The West Coast still has problems. Oregon banned Black people through the state constitution just until like the early 20th century. I mean, things are definitely getting better. We would like them to get better faster. That's all.
All right. Well, thank you so much for talking to me. This was
awesome. My pleasure, man. Thank you for having me over. We appreciate it. Send me the link when it comes out, and I will pump it around.
All right.
Absolutely. All right. Take care, John.
Thank you. You too.